The night my daughter introduced me to her fiancé's family, she laughed when she said my name. Not a nervous laugh. Not the kind you make when you're proud but don't know how to show it. She laughed the way you laugh when you're a little embarrassed by something you can't change. The way you'd laugh if someone asked you to explain why your car is 20 years old or why you still shop at Value Village. "This is my dad," she said. And then she added, almost immediately, "He's a handyman. Fixes things. You know, furnaces, leaky pipes, that sort of thing." She waved her hand a little as she said it, like she was swatting away a fly. Her fiancé's mother, a tall woman in a cream blazer, with the kind of posture you only get from decades of caring what people think, smiled at me the way you smile at someone you don't plan to remember. Polite. Brief. Then she turned back to the centerpiece she'd been adjusting, and kept talking to her daughter-in-law-to-be about the venue. I shook hands with the father. He had a firm grip, the kind men practice. He asked me how the drive was. I told him it was fine, about 3 hours from Sudbury. He nodded like that, explained everything about me. My daughter was already pulling her fiancé back toward the kitchen, where her future mother-in-law had laid out a charcuterie board that probably cost more than my truck payment. I stood near the window and looked out at the backyard. It was October, and the maples were on fire. Nice property, somewhere in the Annex, Toronto. The kind of neighborhood where the driveways are heated, and nobody owns a snowblower because the guy they hired owns one for them. I didn't mind standing alone. I've been alone with my own thoughts my whole life. It's where I do my best thinking. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's what she is, even if her mother and I divorced when she was 11, grew up watching me work. Saturday mornings, I'd be under the sink. Sunday afternoons, I'd be recalking the tub or rewiring an outlet. When the furnace at the old house died in January, I fixed it myself rather than pay the emergency call-out fee, which back then was something like $300. She sat on the basement stairs and watched me, asking questions. She was 8. When she was 12, she stopped finding it interesting. By 16, she found it embarrassing. By the time she left for university in Ottawa, she'd started describing me to her new friends as my dad. He does renovations, which was generous. And by the time she got her master's and moved to Toronto and fell in with a certain kind of crowd, the kind who brunch and use the word curate without irony, I had become, apparently, just a handyman from Sudbury. I didn't take it personally, or I told myself I didn't. Her fiancé's name was Sebastian. He was 34, worked in finance, wore a watch that probably cost more than my house. He wasn't a bad person. He was simply a man who had grown up in a world where certain things were invisible. The pipes in the walls, the wiring behind the outlets, the men who showed up and made everything work again. Those things just worked. He'd never had to think about them. His family was from Vancouver originally. His father, a man named Clifford. Wait, no, I'm not using that name. His father, I'll call him by what I called him all evening, which was Sir, had founded an architectural firm in the 80s. His mother, a woman named, I'll call her what she was that night, which was the woman in the cream blazer, had spent 30 years on various boards and committees and fundraising galas. They had come to Toronto for the engagement dinner, staying at the Four Seasons on Bay Street. I had driven down that morning, stopped at a Tim Hortons in Barrie, arrived at my daughter's condo with a card and a bottle of ice wine from a place near Collingwood that she used to like when she was younger. She put the ice wine in the fridge without looking at it. There were 12 of us at the table. Sebastian's parents, his sister and her husband, 2 couples who were close friends of the family, my daughter's best friend from Ottawa, and me. I was the only person at the table who had driven a truck to get there. I know this because Sebastian's father asked, during the appetizers, what everyone had driven. It was the kind of question that isn't really about cars. His family had come in a rented Lexus. The friends had a Model S and an Audi Q7. Sebastian drove a BMW. My daughter drove the used Subaru I'd helped her buy 2 years ago, which she mentioned quietly and then moved on from quickly. Then they got to me. And you, sir? Sebastian's father said. He had the mild, courteous interest of a man who asks questions he already knows the answers to. F-150, I said. 2009. Still runs, he chuckled. They do last, don't they? It wasn't unkind. But it landed a certain way at the table, and I saw my daughter take a small sip of her wine. The conversation moved on. Sebastian's sister, a physiotherapist named, I believe, something that started with an A, I genuinely don't remember, asked me how long I'd been in Sudbury. I told her my whole life. She asked what it was like. I said it was a good city, good people, good winters, the kind of place where you know your neighbors. It must be quiet, she said. It is, I said. That's lovely, she said, and turned to ask Sebastian something about their honeymoon plans. My daughter was watching me from across the table. I gave her a small nod, the way you nod to let someone know you're fine, and she looked back at her plate. The main course was duck confit. The woman in the cream blazer had apparently ordered it from a caterer. There was a burgundy that the father poured himself, going around the table with the kind of quiet authority that says, "This is what I do. This is who I am." He poured a glass for me. I thanked him. He said, "Do you follow wine at all?" "Not really," I said. "I know what I like." He smiled. "That's all that matters." It didn't feel like that was all that mattered. Later, Sebastian's father asked me, and I think he meant it genuinely, the way curious men ask things when they want to categorize you, what kind of handyman work I did. "Mostly residential," I said. "Some light commercial. Plumbing, electrical, HVAC. General contracting when the job calls for it." "So you work for a company?" "I run my own," I said. "Oh," he said, "how many people?" I thought about it. "Depends on the season. Core crew of 4, sometimes 8 or 9 when we're busy." He nodded, impressed in a small way that he worked to hide. "And mostly Sudbury?" "Sudbury and North," I said. "Sometimes Timmins. Had a contract up near Kapuskasing a few years back." "Big job?" "Decent size," I said. And that was it. He moved on. I didn't volunteer more because I never do, and because I wasn't sure what more would sound like in a room like that. My daughter had been listening. She cut a piece of duck and didn't look up. I want to say that I've always understood her. I want to say that fathers always understand their daughters, and that the distance between us was just geography, just different lives, running in different directions. But that's not entirely true. There was a version of our relationship, when she was small, when she still called me on her way home from school just to talk, when she used to ask me to explain how things worked, and I'd spend an hour drawing diagrams on the back of grocery receipts. That was good. That version was real, and I hold on to it. Then there was the version that developed after her mother remarried. Her stepfather was a dentist in Ottawa. Nice man, I have nothing against him. But he wore button-downs and drove a Volvo, and took my daughter to Europe every summer. And she came back from those trips a little different each time, a little more certain about what she wanted her life to look like. I fit less and less into that picture. She never said it, but the way she introduced me at her engagement dinner said it for her. After dessert, a pavlova with fresh raspberries, very nice. The table relaxed into coffee and conversation, the kind that floats and settles and doesn't go anywhere. Sebastian's father was telling a story about a project his firm had done in Calgary. A mixed-use development, commercial on the lower floors, residential above. He mentioned a name, the name of the developer, the company that had commissioned the build, and I recognized it immediately. It wasn't that I knew the name from the news or from reading about it. I knew it because I had spent 7 months working with that company. Because one of their project managers had called me in 2019 about a problem with the mechanical systems in a building they were trying to sell. And I had fixed it. And the fix had saved the deal. And the developer had sent me a Christmas bottle of scotch that year, and a very nice handwritten note. But I didn't say anything. I have a policy which I've kept my whole life, of not speaking unless speaking adds something. My ex-wife used to call it stubbornness. My foreman calls it patience. I've always thought of it as just knowing when a room wants to hear from you. That room didn't want to hear from me. I knew it. I kept quiet. The father finished his story. Someone said something funny. The table laughed. Then Sebastian's mother, the woman in the cream blazer, set down her coffee cup and looked at me. Not the polite look from earlier in the evening. A different one. The kind that happens when something clicks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I've been trying to place you all evening." I said, "I'm not sure we've met." "You said you do work in Northern Ontario," she said. "HVAC, mechanical general contracting. That's right. Did you ever do any work in?" And she said the name of a community in the Muskoka area. A lakeside development. High-end residential, the kind built in the early 2000s when everyone from Toronto wanted a retreat property. "I did," I said. "Phase 2, I think. Mechanical systems for about 16 units. She stared at me. "You fixed our cottage," she said. The table went quiet, not dramatically, not like a record scratch in a movie. Just, the conversation stopped, the way it stops when something real happens and everyone feels it. "The boiler," I said. "Thanksgiving weekend 2007. It had cracked. You had family coming up." She pressed her hand flat to the table. "We had 14 people arriving Friday. You drove up Thursday night." "I did," I said. "Your husband offered me the guest room. I slept there and finished in the morning before anyone arrived." She turned to her husband. "It's him," she said. He looked at me for a moment, and then something in his expression shifted. He had the look of a man recalculating. "You wouldn't let us pay you the emergency rate," he said slowly. "The job took 4 hours," I said. "I charged what it was worth." He sat back in his chair. "I'm not a man who enjoys being the center of attention. I want to be clear about that. I don't tell this story because I wanted the moment. I tell it because it happened, and because of what it meant, not to me but to my daughter. I saw her face when the woman in the cream blazer said, 'It's him.' I saw the way she looked at me, not with pride, not yet, but with something earlier than pride. Confusion, maybe. The look you get when you realize the map you've been using is wrong." Sebastian's father, whose name I never actually caught over the course of the evening, leaned forward and said, "I want to ask you something, if you don't mind." I said I didn't. The Muskoka project. That was part of a larger development. 14 properties, I think. The contractor on that development went under partway through. "He did," I said. "You finished it." "I finished the mechanical and HVAC on the remaining units," I said. "Brought in a few subs for the framing and exterior. We got it done before the snow." "We know the developer," he said. He stopped. He mentioned a company from Sudbury that saved the project. Said they came in under budget and ahead of schedule. "That would be us," I said. He picked up his wine glass, set it down without drinking. "You never said," he said. "You never asked about the work," I said. "You asked about the truck." Silence. Then Sebastian's mother laughed, a real laugh, the kind you can't manufacture. She looked at my daughter across the table and said, "My darling, your father is the reason we have had that cottage for 20 years. My daughter didn't say anything for a while. Not at the table, not during the drive back to her condo, not in the elevator up to her floor. I walked her to her door the way I used to when she was small. When I'd walk her to school and she'd turn at the door and wave. Inside, she put the kettle on. I sat at her kitchen island and looked at the ice wine I'd brought. It was still in the fridge. I could see it through the glass door. She stood with her back to me while the water heated. "I didn't know," she said finally. "I know," I said. "You never talked about the work. You never asked," I said. Not unkindly, just true. She turned around. She had her mother's eyes, light brown, the kind that go darker when she's upset. They were dark now. "I introduced you as a handyman," she said, "in front of his whole family. I am a handyman," I said. "Among other things." She didn't smile. "Dad, it's all right," I said. "It's not." We looked at each other across her kitchen, across the 20-some years that had built up between us like sediment. All the visits I'd driven down for, and all the times she'd seemed slightly relieved when I left. All the cards I'd sent, and the calls that went short. All the things I'd never said because I didn't think they'd land. "I sold the company," I said. She blinked. What? 2 years ago. I sold it to a group out of Mississauga. Private equity. They wanted the contracts, the crew, the client list. I paused. I stayed on as a consultant for the first year. Now I just take the occasional job. The ones I want. She stared at me. You sold the company, she said slowly. And you didn't tell me. I was going to, I said. It never seemed like the right time. How much? She said, and then stopped. No, you don't have to tell me that. It was a fair price, I said. I'm comfortable. I don't need much. I still fix things because I like fixing things. The ice wine is from a place near Collingwood you used to like. She looked at the fridge. She pressed her hands over her face for a moment, and I let her. I didn't say anything. I've always known that silence can be a form of kindness. When she took her hands down, her eyes were wet. I've been treating you like, she started. You've been busy, I said, and you're building a life. It's fine, it's not fine, she said again. I laughed when I introduced you. I laughed. She sat down across from me at the island. The kettle clicked off. Neither of us moved. Sebastian's family is going to think, she said. They're going to think what they think, I said. That's not what matters. What matters? I looked at her for a long moment. My daughter. The one who used to sit on the basement stairs and ask me how furnaces worked. Who once memorized the names of every tool in my toolbox because she wanted to be able to hand me the right one. Who grew up and moved to a city and became someone I had to schedule appointments to see. You matter, I said. Whether you've got a master's degree or you're fixing pipes in January. Whether you're in a Toronto condo or a Sudbury bungalow. That's it. That's the whole thing. She was quiet for a moment. Then she got up and got 2 mugs. And she made the tea, and we sat in her kitchen until almost midnight. And we talked the way we hadn't talked in years, about small things, real things, the way things used to be, and the way they might be again if we both decided to try. Before I left, she opened the fridge and took out the ice wine. Can we drink this? She said. That's why I brought it, I said. She found 2 glasses. Not wine glasses, the wrong shape, too wide. But she found 2 glasses, and she poured, and we stood in her kitchen and drank the wine I'd bought, at a place off the highway north of Collingwood, and outside the window, the Toronto skyline glittered like it always does. Indifferent and beautiful, and I thought, this is enough. This moment right here is enough. I drove home the next morning. 3 hours, the 400 North, Tim Hortons in Barrie. The maples were still burning along the highway. I had the radio on low, and the window cracked, the way I always do, and I thought about my daughter standing in her kitchen with a too wide wine glass, and I thought about a Thanksgiving weekend in Muskoka in 2007. The boiler cracked, and 14 people are arriving Friday, and a woman in a cream blazer, who would spend the next 17 years not knowing the name of the man who made it possible for her family to sit around that table. We're invisible, most of us. The men who show up before anyone else, who leave before the party starts, who fix the things that need fixing so the rest of life can go on uninterrupted. I've never minded being invisible. I chose it, in a way. I chose the work over the recognition for so long that the 2 things stopped feeling separate. But sitting at that dinner table, watching my daughter swat away my name like a fly, I understood something that I hadn't let myself understand in a long time. Being invisible is only a virtue if the people who love you still see you. She sees me now. That's what I'm holding on to. That and the ice wine, which was very good.